Seconded. Those in favor? This public meeting is now closed. Page 89 has staff's recommendation. I'm looking for direction from this council. Councillor Wells.
Is contained within the report.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder? Councillor Columbus. I will read it, then I'll open it for discussion and consideration. Moved by Councillor Wells, seconded by Councillor Columbus, that the proposed general zoning bylaw amendments to address provisions identified as needing revision in staff report DCS 1719 through operation and applicability of the bylaw be approved for reasons set out in this report DCS 17-19. Discussion. Councillor Black, please.
Would an amendment be in order?
Yes, I'd like to hear it. Well, we're going to hear it anyhow, so, yeah, sorry. Yeah, as long as it isn't contradictory. Go ahead.
What do you think I would be contradictory?
Well, so far your record tonight isn't the best.
Thank you.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, my amendment would be to remove, go to section site triangles 3311, and to remove, okay, proposed, okay, the bottom I was talking about before, this provision shall not apply to field crops. So my amendment would be to remove that. Doubt if I'll get a seconder.
It'd be right with you, and you're going to move that amendment. The amendment is in order. I will need a seconder in order to put the motion on the amendment on the floor. Do I have a seconder?
No.
I do not have a seconder. I think you can stop writing, Mr.
Stop
Clerk.
writing. Well, then, may I speak to the motion then? In lieu of...
Let me see here. Absolutely. The motion is on the floor.
Okay, well, I'm
and
not
you can
going to, because I didn't get an amendment, I'm not going to support the motion on the floor.
Okay.
And specifically to this one, and I'll tell you why. It's not that I'm against the farming community or against growing crops, but I know of circumstances where crops have been grown close to the road and in the site triangles, and accidents have occurred as a result of it. I know one intimately that happened on the second concession of Charlottesville at the corner of the Spooky Hollow Road. And the corn crops were grown right to the edge of the road at a time when it wasn't a T intersection. It is a T intersection right now. And it is a T intersection because I think of that accident, because the road bent around. One car was coming in one direction, another in the other. Could not see each other, a head-on collision. And both cars destroyed, a lot of physical damage. That's one incident that I am well acquainted with. So, you know, I think it's incumbent upon me, being aware of those occurrences happening, to say what I'm saying here, whether I get support or not. I think, you know, the reason why we have this in our zoning bylaw is for safety reasons. And so we're being safe in one area, but we're not being safe in the other area, which does not make any sense to me at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Black. To the motion, Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I'd like to place an amendment on the parking for visitor parking. Unless I hear a big argument from staff, I'd like to see it increased from, instead of one visitor space for every 3 dwelling units, 1 for 5. That's an awful lot of pavement. Like I said earlier, Haldeman's is 1 for 10.
Okay. If I may, I'm on page 96 for those that just. And again, would you just mention your amendment on the visitor parking requirements again, please?
Pardon me?
Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. Could you just, again, go over what your recommendations in your amendment are in the way of visitor parking requirements, please? I heard some of it, I apologize.
Yeah, currently, there's one visitor space being proposed for every 3 dwelling units
Yes,
or part thereof for these particular units.
correct?
You know, I think 1 for 5 would be fine, unless I hear it different from planning, but Haldeman does 1 for 10. Willing to meet a
Understand.
little closer to their side.
So instead of 1 visitor parking for every 3 units, you're recommending it be
1 for
1
5.
for every 5, less dense visitor parking?
Yeah, we create too much pavement.
I
having
got
all
it,
these
I
spots.
just, thank you, sir. Okay, anything else? Counselor Height has put forward this amendment, and I'm going to read it, then ask for seconder, that the parking requirements be amended from 1 space for every 3 dwelling units to 1 space for every 5 dwelling units. Just a second, and I'll look at planning in a second. Thank you, Councillor Oliver. That's kind of important to put in visitor. Thank you. Thank you very much. Planning, I'm told you want to say something?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. This public meeting was not provided notice in that regard to change the parking requirements. That provision already exists in the bylaw today. It would be appropriate for council to give us direction, and we can bring that back and provide the required public notice in that regard. But you can't change it because it hasn't been publicly notified today.
Is that a fair statement?
Yeah,
it
they're
is-
correct.
it does
If
exist.
it wasn't included in the ad, then we haven't really held a public meeting on it, so we can't consider that for bylaw approval. So you can ask for staff to do a report on that, and they'll advertise for it.
Are you
That's-
okay with that?
Let's go that route then, Mr. Mayor.
Let's do that, and I'm going to hand this back. You didn't have a seconder anyhow. So I will get to that in a moment. I won't forget you. I do have the motion that's printed on page, I believe it's 89, yes. So I'm going to go back to that, and then when I call the question on this, certainly you'll be in order to speak on that visitor parking change. To the motion, Councillor Brunton, please. Thank you.
Whoa, okay, well, I want to talk about the building height. Is that in order?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
it's part of the motion, yes.
Well, I would like to see 11 meters across the board instead of resort areas, like, I've driven around Long Point, Turkey Point, and there's these cottages they built, which I think are a lot safer than some of the ones that are there now, are, I'm sure, well above 7.5 meters. And I think it's an improvement myself, so I'd like to see that 11 meters across the board, and I've had requests for that.
I would assume the same situation as the visitor parking.
Yep.
Mr. Clerk, correct? It's already in the bylaw, therefore, I'll get back to you two, or if you want to deal with both of those, you're in agreement, I'll leave that up to you two. Thank you, Councillor Brunton. We'll get to you. Anything else on the motion? Those in favor? Those opposed? Carried. Now, Councillor Height, will go to you. Oh, thank you very much for your work in here, and all your answers are very good. You know it, know this well. Thank you, Shannon. Something along the lines, Councillor Height, I'm looking at you, that staff prepare a report to increase the visitor parking requirements from 3 spaces per dwelling unit. Let's deal with these two separately. Go ahead. If you want to move that, and I'll get a seconder, and then if you want to discuss.
Okay, well, that was, did you have the number 5 in there or not?
Staff prepare a report to increase the visitor parking requirements from 3 spaces per dwelling units.
Or just in
No,
general?
go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the staff, if you're directing staff to do a report, they they have the option to present professional opinions as planners that might differ from 5. So rather than get too specific in the motion, they can bring forward what they want to bring forward, and you can propose 5 at that time.
Yeah, that's what
In other words, the report will get it on the table.
Yeah, I wasn't looking to put the 5 back
Are
in.
you, I'm sorry?
I was not looking to put the 5 back in.
It's not in there, no. It's to
Okay.
say the report to deal with increasing it
Yeah, that's right.
from the 3 spaces.
Correct.
Okay?
Perfect.
You okay? That's a mover. I need a seconder. Councillor Brunton, I'm going to deal with this one, and then Councillor Brunton, after the vote, I'll get back to you on the building height. Okay, to the motion, Councillor Oliver.
Mr. Mayor, I don't mean to be nitpicky on this, but when I heard you say the wording, increasing the visitor parking requirement from 3 spaces, you actually mean decreasing the visitor requirement from 1 per 3 to 1 per 5.
I thought about that as I, yeah. I didn't make it, I just read it. But I thought about that for a minute, and I thought, should be increase the number of spaces, not the number of visitor spaces. Okay, that staff prepare a report to decrease. That makes more sense. Thank you. I'm glad you're sitting there, Councillor Oliver. To decrease the visitor parking requirements from 3 spaces per dwelling unit. No, it didn't sound right. Just give me a second. Staff prepare a report to decrease the visitors' parking requirements. We're not talking about 3 spaces per dwelling units at all. We were talking about 1 space for 3. So that's why I kind of thought this doesn't make sense. So what are you thinking there, mister? Yeah, so we want staff to bring back a report on visitor parking requirements.
I think that's
I
exactly,
think the
that's
intent is
exactly
to
it,
make
Mr.
them
Mayor.
less dense, the number of visitor.
Correct.
Parking
Preferably with a decrease.
Pardon? You're hoping for a decrease in the requirements. Yeah. If you have more people visiting than living there, then you may be. Let's try this. That staff prepare a report to decrease the visitor parking requirements from 1 space per 3 dwelling units.
I think we can work with that one.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Mr. Black.
I think it's, we're going to end up creating more problems and more parking problems because we already have all kinds of those problems around because we don't have enough space for anyone, for visitors, whoever it may be. So I think we're just, we're creating more problems, and if, I know Councillor Height made reference to more pavement. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be pavement. It can be another surface treatment. It could be something porous.
Any further discussion? Mr. Columbus?
I think we're opening up a hornet's nest here. I get a lot of calls from where there's intensive development in the Delhi area, Harvest Lane area. I know Lee's people have been getting them for snow removal, where a lot of times you can have a dwelling unit in a condo or semi-detached, and there could be 4 vehicles that belong to that household already. So where are those other 2 vehicles supposed to park? They end up parking on the street, and then we can't get snow removal. We need more. If they use visitor parking, that's good, but we need more visitor parking in some of those areas. Perhaps Lee can comment on it. She gets the calls too.
Lee, your thoughts? It is related to the motion, but it's maybe a decrease in the amount of visitor parking could result in changing those visitor ones to occupants. Lee, do you wish to comment? I think it's in order here, please.
Through the Mayor to Council, Public Works is very much looking forward to commenting on the planning report and providing our input at that time. It's not a simple it's not a simple number. And I think that part of the other issue that needs to be explored is the fact that our zoning bylaw allows for a parking spot to be considered a garage within the garage, and that causes a lot of grief because the majority of people we hear from don't park their vehicles in the garage. So in fact, they're losing one parking space. So I think that a staff report is very beneficial to allow council to consider it in more detail with all of the pertinent information being presented at that time.
Well, I'm sure if this motion did pass, we would have some discussion, I'm sure. However, that'll be up to you whether you want to. Staff prepare a report to decrease the visitor parking requirements from 1 space per 3 dwelling units. Any further discussion? Those in favor? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? I will also vote, and that motion will be defeated. Mr. Brunton, I believe you want to talk about building height.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I'll give it a whirl. How's that? My reason for going to 11 meters, and first of all, is consistency across the board. In the resort area, recently, the LPRCA, we've dealt with, I'm going to say at least 4 applications where people come in and rebuild their cottages, and they put first floor up in order for flood proofing, and in some cases above a certain elevation, which I know of one now, it's going to be at least 8 feet on piers. Then they put the first story on, and then they put an addition on top of that. And architecturally, I don't know what they're going to look like if they have to put a roof on there that's got to be flat. I think it'd be more appropriate to have an appropriately pitched roof. So. And we, my fellow colleague, we have approved those recently. So I think the way things are going, and I do believe they're a lot safer, the ones that we have approved, compared to the ones that are existing that are probably 3 or 4 meters high, if I could use that term. So personally, I think 11 meters across the board, and if people build under that, fine. But I think because of the flood regulations we're running into, people are raising the main floor quite high. They build a second story in many cases, and then to put the appropriate roof on it, I wouldn't wish anybody to put a flat roof on. It should be a pitched roof by all means, and I just think it's more appropriate to have the 11 meters. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, you can't sit down on me like there's nothing to discuss. I thought you were going to put an amendment on the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, I like to put the amendment.
It's up to you, but we can't discuss something unless it's on the floor. I was expecting you to get up and put an amendment, and then you could give your rationale.
I'd like to have staff.
Thank you.
I don't know if they have to do a report to amend the resort area to bring it to a standard of 11
Yes,
meters.
yeah, because it's already in the bylaw, so
Right.
Same procedure as the parking.
That's
Yes.
correct.
Go ahead.
So, did you get that, Andy? That the
We'll see what he has here. And while you're on your feet,
Yep.
before I get a mover seconder, I want to make sure this is what your indication is, or what your intent is, sorry. That staff be directed to prepare a report upon setting the maximum building height at 11 meters in Norfolk County resort areas.
That's correct.
Okay? And you're willing to move that? Boy, I hope you get a seconder. Councillor Height?
I'll second that.
Okay, I'm glad now it's
Absolutely.
on the floor.
And I'd like to speak to it too,
Brunton
because
and Height, and you may speak to it since you're on your feet, please.
right now, I appreciate staff's comment that they're getting calls where people don't want the height. I'm not getting those calls. I'm getting the other ones that are trying to build their cottages up, and they're facing this huge hurdle. A bunch of us here sit on the Conservation Authority. We feel that it's better to lift the cottages up so the people don't drown. To do that, it has to come above the ground. We can't make, our builders unfortunately can't make it fit. within the 7.5 and still give you a two-story cottage, which, as we know, most of our lakeside communities already have tons of them. So this to me is just a method of restriction. It doesn't actually increase their safety whatsoever. And in the grand scheme of things, it's tying up everything. It's tying up our planning, it's tying up the Conservation Authority applications, our building and bylaw, and most importantly, it's tying up good paying customers who want to develop the piece of property that they pay hefty amounts of taxes on. And I hope we get that sorted out, because I don't want another year and a half of this. It's only been 6 months now.
Councillor Black?
Maybe I'm the counselor that gets all the other calls, because I do get calls. As a matter of fact, I think there's a committee of adjustment, one on Turkey Point, and this individual is concerned about these very same issues. And my concerns goes way back to the beginning. Like, was this what was this area supposed to be for? It was supposed to be used for seasonal use. Like, they would go down usually in the summertime and stay there, uninsulated properties, no foundations, nothing under it. They were truly resort residential or cottages, but now they're not. When building permits come in, I mean, they're full-blown houses now. And it go back, we have an OMB hearing that said only 73 people residents can be there full-time. And why is that? Because they determined that areas like Long Point and Turkey Point were not safe, because they are hazard land. They are prone to flooding, and you put human life at risk. So I support that. I don't want to put anybody's life at risk. I don't want to be the one responsible when there's a storm, and then when the cottagers come to council and say, well, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you should have done something, and you didn't. So I'm taking the position that I would rather be safe than sorry, and we all know how many storms we've had and how much property loss that we've had. It goes way back to Abigail Becker, as a matter of fact, down in Port Rowan. And it's health issues as well. The water table. I mean, the water table, you could just dig right down and there it is. So how is that a good thing in terms of water and good safe water and disposal of septic and sewage? In my mind, it's not. So all of these new developments, as soon as you raise that roof, then you see properties expanding, covering more of the lot, more development. And what does that mean? Another bathroom, more people, more cars, more people at risk. And that is the other side of the coin. And there are many, many people that support what I'm saying. So I won't support it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Oliver?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I applaud my colleagues for putting something forward. I would have been personally more comfortable with Councillor Brunton's motion had he directed 9 meters rather than 11. I would remind council that, and I guess it was the previous council perhaps, Mr. Mayor, not our current one, but when we passed our new zoning bylaw for Norfolk County, we did put a maximum 9-meter height stipulation for our resort communities. And we all around the table saw that as a reasonable compromise. That was 1.5 meters what it had been in the former township of Norfolk, and it was, I think, 2 meters less than what it had been in the former township of Delhi, and that's how we arrived at that compromise. And I think generally, both cottage owners and the building community found that a good compromise. We know what happened then. It got challenged by 1 or 2 individuals threatening us to go to the OMB, and we chose to change it in order to avoid an OMB hearing that we thought we would probably lose because it was not in conformity with our OP. Unfortunately, it still isn't in conformity with our OP, whether it's 9 or 11, and I'm concerned with this going forward at 11, and there is a question in all of this, Mr. Mayor, to staff. If we do provide this direction, and if staff do come back with a draft bylaw amendment specifically implementing 11 meters, Are we still going to be completely in contravention of our official plan, and are we back to the chicken and egg scenario, I guess is my question.
Pam, please. Thank you, Councillor Oliver.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, good question, Councillor Oliver. I think the best course of action if council is wanting to change the height in the resort residential area to whether it be 9 or 11 meters, an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment combined together would be the way to go.
Actually, that's very good advice, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate that. Could we do that as part of this motion that Councillor Brunton has put forward? In other words, staff be directed to bring back a draft OP amendment and a draft zoning bylaw amendment to, whether it's 9 or 11, we can talk about that, but could we do that by motion? And that would set this process in motion a bit quicker than 18 months.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, absolutely. The only thing that I would caution council on is that planning staff would be recommending to take our time, although it would be much quicker than the official plan review process, but to allow for proper public engagement,
Yes.
because we know there will be people to speak on both sides.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Further discussion? Yeah, you can speak again. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Being as I guess, made the motion, I don't know what we did at Long Point there the other day when we approved about 4 of them. I don't know how high they are. But if we stick with what we've got now, we've got a problem with everything we've approved up there. And to my colleague, Mr. Black, we are making it safer. These cottages that are being rebuilt are a lot safer than the ones that are there. So I can't buy that argument. I would go along with whatever time it takes staff to look into that motion. So I have no time limit that's concerned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Height?
I'm thinking time limit, Mr. Mayor, to stop my phone ringing. I'm thinking 3 months. I'd like to set return dates on this because this whole 18th month business, isn't working for Noel. That's way too long. The season's about to start up. We've seen this planning thing come within like the speed of light the first time it came through, and council had to put the brakes on for it to come back. Right? I don't see why it can't be done in 90 days.
Mr. Baird, could I get you to comment whether it come back by the middle of May?
Sure, thank you very much. I think, Councillor Height, we understand you want a quick resolution, but the only thing is that we've got to follow proper protocol that's in the Planning Act. We need to consult the public. We would not want to put council at risk of a public meeting where it involves cottage owners who are away all winter. And let's say the matter came back, in April. We do need to engage, and I think Ms. Dusling has made a point that we would do it as promptly as we can, but we still have to follow the process.
Right, and that process has a minimum number of days required.
6 months, Councillor,
Is the minimum?
is what we're, that's our target date that's prescribed in the Planning Act.
Mm-hmm.
But again, depending on work volumes and other applications, but something like this is surely to engage. This is not just a simple zoning amendment. This is something that is going to have people on both sides that are going to want to have the opportunity to express their concerns so that council, you will ultimately make your decision, but you want to have it well-founded on the information that you're provided.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'd like to see it sooner than later. And as far as the argument goes about people being on holidays because they're cottage owners, didn't we just deal with the washroom thing in wintertime?
Thank you. Any further discussion? Second time, Councillor Black? You sure? You want a recorded vote? You will get a recorded vote. I'll have the clerk get ready. Councillor Oliver?
Mr. Mayor, I know you're going to read the motion again, but based on what I think we started out with, I'm going to move an amendment.
Okay.
And that amendment would be that it be both a staff report on a zoning bylaw amendment, but also an OP amendment to allow for the implementation of raising the height. So that part I'm sure my colleagues will probably not have any issue with, but my amendment's going to be that the maximum height be set at 9 meters rather than 11. I don't know.
I don't
Yours
know.
is 11, it's in
Okay.
the motion. I'm suggesting an amendment that would reduce it, but
Set your recorded vote paper aside for a moment. And, Yeah, clerk says your amendment to this would be in order. So just, yeah, if you wish. He's writing the amendment, so I'll, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I do get a seconder for this, again, I just want to stress that this is what was already debated at length throughout the zoning bylaw process when we were developing our new zoning bylaw, was approved by a majority of the public and the builders. They felt they could accommodate that and was approved by council. And then I recounted some of the history after that. And I'm just concerned if we shoot for the moon, we may not get anything with this. And I strongly feel that what we had before and what we've directed through our OP amendment review process that's been going on for the last 12 months is aiming towards that compromise building height that we had approved before of 9 meters. So that's my concern, that I want something that we know will likely be successful, and I'm fearful the original motion just would not have made its way. It would go through this council perhaps, but inevitably would end up at the OMB and probably would be rejected then based on the history. If we go with what we had 24 months ago, in my opinion, it's got a much better chance of being successful at that level.
Before I get to mover and seconder, just so that if there's anything that needs to be tidied up, we can do that. This amendment, if put on the floor, would read that the height for the report be set at 9 meters, and that staff prepare an OP and zoning amendment at the same time the report is considered. Now, this 9 meters nowhere. The motion mentions resort, so this relates back to that. I wanted to make sure. We've already dealt with the residential and the hamlet, and that's been passed. You wish to obviously move this amendment? Seconder? Councillor Wells. Now, we are going to deal with the amendment first, and then we'll go back to the motion. So, speaking to the amendment, and that is to set the height at 9 meters. Okay. Councillor Brunton, you're first to the amendment.
Well, 9, 11, 10, what's the difference? If we could be challenged on all of it if we have to go to the OMB, I guess. Am I correct? So if the report comes back and there's some, I would hope they look at the recent building applications through Mr. Baird's department of what's undertaken down there in the last while and come up with some logic behind the elevation they're going to recommend. I'd be willing to listen to that, but I think I'm open, I guess, but I just can't see it staying at 7.5 or whatever it is. I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Height, please. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I guess I was hoping that we would have given staff a little more flexibility to come up with options like the 9 or 11. Like, if it's 9 and we receive 19 out of 20 development applications that all require a minor variance, I think that's something that they could get through the historics of it. But if it's 11 and there's no minor variances, I'm happier with that solution as opposed to the 9.1 meter. With the new rules of the Conservation Authority picking up the bottoms, again, you're restricting your height and you're making it harder for your developers. Personally, I don't have a problem if they all come back in and we do a public meeting to get all that input over again, because the rules have changed as far as the bottoms go now. And it's much harder for the designers to come up with the houses like that. Your services have to be out of the floodplains. So, no basements and things. It's much more difficult. I don't really like the idea of setting staff those targets.
Anyone else on the amendment? Okay. I think we understand the amendment. The amendment is to set the height at 9 meters when this report does come back, and that we prepare an OP and a zoning amendment at the same time as the report. I'm going to, recorded vote was on the main, yeah, not on the amendment. So I'll call the question. Those in favor of the amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? That's 4. I'll vote, and I'm going to support the amendment. So it will carry. So we'll wait for that report to come back. On that, we'll see if this motion asking for the report to come back with a maximum building height of 11 meters in the Norfolk County. Well, we've just settled on that, didn't we? So, recorded vote on this?
Through you, yeah, on the main motion
On
as
the main
amended.
motion?
Yeah. Councillor Oliver.
Yes.
Councillor Columbus.
Well, the main motion is that staff be directed to bring the report upon setting the maximum building height at 11 meters in Norfolk County resort areas.
Yeah.
But the amendment has put it at 9, therefore this is the motion as amended. And I'm sorry, I should have said as amended, but this is still a legitimate motion, but it has been amended from 11 to 9. My apologies. Yeah. Staff be directed to prepare a report. And the amendment that was passed said 9 meters to be included in the report. Now we're going to authorize the report. No, as amended to 9. Because the amendment was 9 and it passed. So 11 is not in the play. Again, you want to start with the recorded vote, please?
Councillor Oliver.
Yes.
Councillor Columbus.
Yes.
Councillor Geisens. Yes. Councillor Height.
I'm still not sure what we're voting on. We've picked 9 meters and that passed. And Councillor Brunton wants 11 meters and we're voting on that?
No, the 11 is not.
Okay, so there is no main motion then?
There is a main motion to get staff to bring the report back. The 11 now has been superseded by an amendment which was in order to change the 11 to 9. But we still need to deal with the original motion that's on the floor.
For the staff report?
That's
I
really
vote
what
yes.
that's what it's really saying. Go ahead.
I vote yes.
He says yes.
Councillor Sonnenberg. Wells. Black. No. Councillor Brunton. The motion carries.
Thank you, and I'm going to vote too, but you're not going to ask me that now?
Mayor Lick.
There's nobody more confused here than me. Not really. Everything we did is in order procedurally. All right?
Yes. The motion carried. 8-1.
You two had enough? It's great. Reports. Of council members, and next we're going to talk about a general discussion of the use of the legacy fund interest. As you know, the Legacy Fund Advisory Committee that met back in December made some recommendations. Some of them were adopted by council. On the Monday before we started budgets. And one of the recommendations left to deal with was that there was still a total of $250,000 that was not committed at that time. And so we want to have a discussion and deal with possibly seeing where we want to place that 250,000. There was a motion back at budget time, at the end of budget session, by Councillor Wells that we apply it to bring the levy down another roughly 3%. That was defeated. So that is not an option. And I do have a motion here that I think, to get things started, I will deal with this, and then there will be discussion, obviously, and where we go from here, we'll see. So moved by Councillor Oliver and seconded by Councillor Height that Norfolk County make a donation of the $250,000 in uncommitted 2015-16 excess earnings from the Legacy Fund to the Norfolk Community Foundation, subject to conditions to be determined by Norfolk County. Speakers to that, I'll start with Oliver, Wells, and Black, please.
First of all, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for allowing this motion to be at least put out on the table for us to talk about at the beginning of the discussion. I did put a motion like this forward at the Legacy Fund Committee back in December, and of course that did not pass at that time. So I appreciate the chance for us to talk about it again tonight in the full context of council. I think circumstances have certainly changed since December, and we've gone through our whole budgeting process. We're all now well aware that we had a pretty successful year, I would say, with the income generated by the Legacy Fund of some $2.9 million. We've met all of our other commitments, which our Legacy Fund policy said we should do, which is to apply our $2 million to our capital, top up the reserve fund, and we chose to also allocate $500,000 towards this year's commitment with the hospital donation, which I thought was a very good solution, or a suggestion from staff, and that, of course, is what we did as part of the budgeting process. So it just seems to me there may never be a better opportunity to support this county-wide foundation that's out there beating the bushes for donations, receiving requests from all kinds of organizations, large and small, across the whole county, to support projects that we, I'm sure, as a council would support as well. So I really believe that this would be the right thing for us to do as council. We're not setting a precedent. You don't need to be concerned about that. We would consider things on a yearly basis depending on income that we may or may not have in any given year from the Legacy Fund. So to me, this is absolutely the right thing to do at this point in time, as we are doing with other fundraising organizations, such as the $13 million campaign from the hospital and the Delhi Community Center funding that we've given them in the past couple of years as well. So I hope council will see its way clear to support this request with this one time, with this uncommitted funding. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Wells, and Black, and Geisens. Yes, point of order. Yes, absolutely.
Did council vote on this the last time?
When did council vote on?
The Legacy Fund, that where we were going to use it and we didn't?
Well,
I assume that's, we're talking about the same people now?
Say again, I'm sorry.
Basically, how long ago did we have that vote by council and we did not approve the that Legacy Fund being to the, I guess, to the people that are asking for it now? Am I correct in that? And I'll apologize if I'm wrong.
Well, I can answer that. Or, Mr. Clerk, I want to get the date correct. You go ahead, because I'm looking up the date for Councilor
Well, if
Geis.
that's, I don't know what the date is, but...
Well, I do. I just want to get the
Would
right...
reconsideration not be
23rd.
required? That's all my question is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You are correct. Anyhow, the advisory committee, as I mentioned, met in December, sent their recommendations on to council, which was dealt with on Monday, January the 23rd, which is the day before budgets. Well, it started January 24th. And that evening, everything that was mentioned in there was approved by council. Andy, it came to council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe there was 4 specific resolutions
Yes.
from the Legacy Fund which were pulled and approved by council. None of those resolutions in specific mentions anything in regards to the Norfolk Community Foundation. The only indication is that the $250,000 will be made available for allotment by council's discretion. So there has been votes at other bodies, but council itself hasn't actually voted in any regards on that.
And if I may, there is one correction there. There were both 4 motions that came to council. There was a motion from advisory that was to suggest 250 go to the Norfolk Foundation, and that motion was defeated, and that was in the minutes of the meeting. But Councillor Oliver is quite correct. Outside of that motion being defeated, there was $2 million in the reserves, 100 and some thousand, 110 roughly, I'm not sure, that went into the reserve contingency or the save it for a rainy day. We have a bad return under 2 million. Number 3, there were 500,000 to the NGH, which was already reflected in the budget that we dealt with starting the next day to not put it on the levy, and there was a balance of 250 to be determined at the discretion of council, which we're dealing with tonight. So, continue, Councillor Geisens. I just wanted to get the date and what I remember from those 2 meetings I attended.
Well, if I listen to what the clerk says, I don't have any problem. If we didn't deal with it, then we can continue and deal with it without a reconsideration vote.
Thank you, and certainly it was not allotted. It was to be allotted and discussed at budget, and as I think I said, I kind of forgot about it. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering, has this motion bypassed our process? Should there not have been a notice of motion? How did it come directly to council?
Okay, I stand to be corrected. I was thinking of something else that I'm bringing up that was missed at budget. It wasn't this, so I'm going to apologize for that.
I'm talking about this motion.
This motion, this amount of 250,000 was to be determined by council, correct?
Councillor Oliver's motion.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the reason this discussion ended up on the agenda was by request of the mayor.
Oh.
So the mayor had requested that I
Yes.
add this as a discussion item.
So
Councillor Oliver
So that-
had approached me and contacted me about his desire to put forward a notice of motion, and I said, this item is actually being discussed tonight, or on the next agenda, so there is no need for a notice of motion because it's already before council.
The mayor trumps the notice of motion.
The mayor, as his position, can direct me to add things directly on the
Okay.
agenda. Yeah.
Fine.
I asked to be put on for discussion. It's on the agenda for discussion. I didn't ask for any specific motion, but there is one here, the motion in order. Then I will deal with it, yes. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Black. Now, where was I here? See, Oliver Wells, yes, that was a procedure, so that's Wells, Black, and Geisens. Go ahead, and then Brunton.
Well, first of all, before I begin, Mr. Mayor, let me thank you very much for the lessons that we are learning today. Mr. Mayor, first of all, I would like to say that I believe in community foundations. I think they do great work for our communities. And I have a bias, and I'd like to be upfront about that. Maybe I even have a conflict of interest, because I am the chair of the Port Dover Community Foundation. But after having said that, Mr. Mayor, you'll be surprised at what I'm about to say next. In spite of that, I will not be supporting the motion that's on the floor. Some will argue that it's not taxpayers' money that we're giving away. But I would counter with the argument that when we sold Norfolk Power, the interest was to be used to benefit all taxpayers. That was the purpose when we sold it. I know it can be argued that this will benefit the entire communities. I know we can argue that if we so desire. But this reminds me of the provincial government when they are trying to give money away to hydro and justify it. Or the federal government when they're trying to give billions of dollars away to Bombardier and justify it. That's taxpayers' dollars. Taxpayers' dollars. To be used for what? I think in Norfolk County, our taxpayers' dollars are to be used for services to our taxpayers. Most of us know we don't have enough money to go around. So why would we look for places to spend money that we don't have? Mr. Mayor, around this table, we are excellent councillors. And I have great pride in saying that I am a Norfolk County councillor. But Mr. Mayor, we are here to represent all of our taxpayers. We take money from our taxpayers. I'm not sure that any of us was elected to give their taxpayers' dollars away to any one specific group. The money that we get from our taxpayers is for services to our taxpayers. We are not in the business of giving money away. We are not in the business of being a community foundation. If the public wishes to give to a community foundation, that is their choice. But when the public gives us money, it is for Norfolk County business. A community foundation is not Norfolk County councillors' business. And I will not be supporting this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Black.
Thank you, Mayor Luke, and I'm not going to support it either. And actually, Councillor Wells and I had this discussion quite a while ago, and it was a difficult decision. I have to say that, because in the beginning, I thought, yes, this is a good idea, to be able to give the foundation some money, and then they explained to me anyway that they would value the opinions of councillors around the table and distribute it accordingly, to wards and that. And I thought, well, yeah, that's a good idea. Until, I started to look at our infrastructure, the money that we get from the province. It's less and less, the money from the federal government, less and less problems with our infrastructure. What really is a priority? I know we have so many different things. We need to accommodate as many as we possibly can. But in my mind, where the money should be going is to some of the hard services, some of our infrastructure, whether it be water and sewer, whether it be bridges. I'd like to choose roads. And you've heard me say it. I'm sure you all predicted I was going to say roads. And you all know, the roads are not in the best of shape throughout the whole county. And in particular, I get tons of complaints in Ward 5 from Simcoe of the roads being in such poor shape, they've never been worse. So if I were to listen to my constituents, taxpayers of Norfolk County, my choice would be to put that money towards the roads. And we all know that our roads reserve budget is in the red, going out for many years. So I think that is the more serious priority, and not to diminish Councillor Oliver's motion. Those are needs as well in the community. But I think in this case, for me, I would prefer to vote in favor of putting that money towards our infrastructure. Thank you.
Councillor Geisens. Okay, Councillor Brunton.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Well, I'm going to start off by saying I can't support the motion either. Councillor Oliver, I have my own thoughts on it. Councillor Wells indicated there's a foundation in Dover. There's one in Victoria. I don't know if Waterford has a foundation. There's all kinds of groups out there, I'm sure, that would love to get $250,000, but two concerns. One, we sent staff back to find $250,000 in the budget. We haven't heard back from them yet, which I assume will come back with some news on where they're going to make those cuts. The other thing, if we're going to spend some of the money, I I'm going to throw this idea out again, and I say this because I heard it yesterday from another gentleman that we happen to be, I use the word interviewing, that municipalities are doing the exact same thing I'm going to tell you about, and that is they're, with the price of oil still very, very low comparative to a few years ago, and I looked up the figures just a few minutes ago, the price of AC, which goes into our hot mix paving and our surface treatment work, is down by almost $400 a metric ton. And that's a lot of money compared to a high of $800 and something a ton. So if we did anything with that $250,000, I like to put $100,000 more into surface treatment this year, maybe put the rest in the bank for a rainy day or whenever we might need it. But to give it to an organization, I don't feel that it's proper without giving it to all the foundations. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, too, will not be supporting the motion. When we sold Norfolk Power, I'm sure we stipulated that the proceeds were to go to capital projects, infrastructure, and that's where I want to see it to go. Groups are fine. They do great work, but they should raise their money individually throughout the community. We have to keep our infrastructure up. I have a road in my area. It's the county line between us and Haldeman. It is barely drivable. It is in such bad shape. The shoulders are crumbling. It is heaving. It is disgusting. And when I look at our long-term road improvements, it's not due until 2022. 5 years from now, we got to negotiate that crappy road. Our money has to go to infrastructure. So I won't be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Columbus.
Mr. Mayor, I too cannot support the motion. I've had a lot of feedback on this from people, residents complaining about their hydro bills being excessive, and they figure that, this has contributed to it. And I know over the years, this organization has tried to put the squeeze on most of the councillors here on how we're going to divvy it up. I think originally they wanted $5 million from the legacy fund. Now they're down to $250,000. So, but still, it's just the optics of it all are not good. I'd sooner see this go towards infrastructure, or lastly, put it in reserves for next year's budget.
Anything further? Okay, you've heard the motion. I don't think I need to reread it. I'm going to call the question. Those in favor of the motion? 1, 2. I saw 2. Those opposed? Motion's defeated. Yeah, you've had better nights. Now, sooner or later, we got to put the 250 allotted to something. You want to just continue this discussion? Councillor Black, then Brunton.
If I propose one thing, I mean, it'll be all over the map. 'Cause I think it seems like the majority want it to go towards infrastructure, and I'm not sure if it should be sent back to staff to maybe to James Johnson. James, are you putting your hand up because you want to respond? Because I wouldn't mind hearing from James.
Would you like to hear from James?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind hearing from
Well,
James.
then,
on this
if
issue.
you ask me, I'll ask James. James?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. If council would like, we could put together a list of projects, infrastructure-related projects, and get SLT to review it and prioritize it, and then bring it to council in a couple weeks, if that's what council would prefer.
I'm looking around the table here, and I'm thinking that it would probably be more palatable to ask staff to bring us some options forward that we can consider. And so my motion would be just that, if that's all right, Mayor Luke, to forward it to James and staff
Councillor Black, if it's okay with you, could I, when you're done speaking, ask just a show of hands for direction?
Sure.
And then you could go fly with that, you'd be directed to bring back some options, and there may be some other things, but I think this is good to ask staff their opinion on this, and we may not agree with any of them, so I'll let